The telegram arrived on the same day Winnie Zimmerman buried her twin sister, and when she opened it with trembling fingers in the dusty parlor of their tiny Hillsborough, New Mexico boarding house, the words blurred together until she could barely make sense of them. Elizabeth was gone, really gone, and now some distant cousin she had never met was offering condolences that felt as hollow as the wind rattling through the desert scrub outside. Winnie crumpled the paper in her fist and let it fall to the floor, her black mourning dress suddenly suffocating in the September heat of 1882. She stood alone in the room they had shared since arriving in New Mexico territory 3 years ago. Two 18-year-old girls fresh from Ohio, with dreams of starting a millinery shop in a growing town. Now at 21, Winnie was the only one left, and the half-finished hats scattered across their work tables seemed to mock her with their cheerful ribbons and silk flowers. Elizabeth had always been the one with the steady hands for the delicate work, while Winnie handled the customers and kept the books. How was she supposed to do any of it without her other half? The funeral had been small that morning, attended by a handful of their boarding house neighbors and Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store where they bought their supplies. The fever had taken Elizabeth so quickly that Winnie still could not quite believe it. 1 week, her sister had been laughing and pinning a feathered creation to a dress form, and the next she was burning up with fever, her skin hot enough to scald. The doctor had shaken his head and muttered about the risks of living in a frontier town with limited medicine, as if that explained why death had chosen Elizabeth instead of her. Winnie walked to the window and looked out at the dusty main street of Hillsborough. The town had grown since they arrived, swelling with miners seeking silver in the nearby Black Range Mountains and ranchers driving cattle through on their way to market. She could see the saloon across the way, hear the tinny piano music drifting through the afternoon air. Life was continuing as if nothing had changed, as if the world had not just split in two. A knock at the door made her turn. She did not want to see anyone, did not want to hear another well-meaning word of sympathy, but she crossed the room anyway and opened it. Mrs. Patterson, their landlady, stood in the hallway with a concerned expression creasing her weathered face. "Miss Zimmerman, there is a gentleman downstairs asking for you," she said. "Says it is about the boarding house fees." Winnie felt her stomach drop. She had been so consumed with nursing Elizabeth, and then planning the funeral that she had not thought about the practical matters. Their rent was due, and without Elizabeth's income from the hat-making, she was not sure how she would manage it. "Tell him I will be down in a moment," she said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. She smoothed her dress and checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin. Her face looked gaunt, dark circles under her green eyes making her look older than her years. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she tucked a few loose strands behind her ears before heading downstairs. The man waiting in the front parlor was not what she expected. He was young, perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore dusty trail clothes and held a worn hat in his hands, turning it absently as he studied a faded painting on the wall. When he heard her footsteps, he turned, and she was struck by the kindness in his brown eyes. "Miss Zimmerman," he asked, his voice low and gentle. "I am Owen Barrett. I apologize for intruding on your grief, but Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might be in need of some help with expenses." Winnie stiffened. "I do not need charity, Mr. Barrett." "I was not offering charity," he said quickly. "I was hoping to make a business arrangement. You see, my ranch is about 10 miles outside of town, and I have been looking for someone who could do mending and possibly make some items for trade. I noticed the hat shop sign in your window, and I thought perhaps you might be interested in taking on some work." She studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. In her experience, men in frontier towns rarely offered help without expecting something in return. But there was something genuine in his expression, something that made her want to trust him despite her wariness. "What kind of items?" she asked carefully. "Shirts, trousers, that sort of thing. I have ranch hands who are hard on their clothes, and the nearest seamstress besides you is in Silver City, which is a full day's ride. I would pay fair wages, and I could provide transportation if you were willing to come out to the ranch once a week." Winnie considered this. It was not the elegant hat-making work she and Elizabeth had dreamed of, but it was honest work, and she desperately needed the income. "How much are you offering?" He named a sum that was more than generous, and she felt a flicker of suspicion return. "That seems like a lot for mending." "I am also hoping you might be able to make some curtains for the ranch house," he admitted. "My mother passed 2 years ago, and the place has been looking shabby. I am not good with that sort of thing, and I figured someone with your skills might be able to help make it feel like a home again." There was something in the way he said it, a loneliness that echoed her own, that made Winnie's defenses soften slightly. "I suppose I could do that. When would you want me to start? Would tomorrow be too soon? I could come by with the wagon in the morning, say around 8 o'clock. She nodded, feeling the first small stirring of purpose since Elizabeth had died. Tomorrow would be fine. He smiled then, a warm expression that transformed his face, and tipped his hat to her. "I will see you in the morning, Miss Zimmerman, and again, I am truly sorry for your loss." After he left, Winnie stood in the parlor for a long moment, listening to the sound of his boots on the wooden sidewalk outside. Mrs. Patterson appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "He seems like a good man," the landlady said. "His mother used to come into town for church before she took ill. Always spoke highly of her son." Winnie did not respond, just turned and went back upstairs. The room felt emptier than ever, but as she looked at the scattered hat-making supplies, she felt something shift inside her. She could not bring Elizabeth back, but she could find a way to keep going. She had to. That night she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elizabeth's face, heard her sister's laugh, felt the absence like a physical wound. When dawn finally broke, painting the desert sky in shades of pink and gold, Winnie rose and dressed in a simple gray work dress. She packed a small bag with her sewing supplies and some measuring tape, then sat by the window to wait. Owen Barrett arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 bay horses. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentlemanly hand, and they set off down the main street and out into the open desert landscape. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. For the first few miles, they rode in silence. Winnie watched the landscape roll by, the rugged mountains rising in the distance, the endless sky stretching overhead. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, so different from the green hills of Ohio where she and Elizabeth had grown up. "How long have you been in Hillsborough?" Owen asked finally, breaking the quiet. 3 years, Winnie said. "My sister and I came out in 1879. We wanted to start our own business, make something of ourselves." "That takes courage," he said. "Not many women would make that journey. We had nothing keeping us in Ohio. Our parents died of cholera when we were 16, and we had been living with an aunt who made it clear we were a burden. When we turned 18, we decided to head west and find our own way." She did not know why she was telling him this, why the words were spilling out so easily. Perhaps it was because he was essentially a stranger, someone who had not known Elizabeth, who did not look at her with pitying eyes. "You must miss her terribly," Owen said softly. Winnie felt her throat tighten. "She was my other half. We used to joke that we shared one soul between two bodies. Now I feel like half of me is missing." "I know something about that," he said. "When my mother died, I felt like I had lost my anchor. She was the one who held everything together after my father was killed in a mining accident. For a long time, I did not know how to keep going." "How did you manage it?" Winnie asked, genuinely curious. "Work, mostly. I threw myself into building up the ranch, taking care of the cattle, fixing up the house. It helped to have something to focus on, something that required all my attention. And time, I suppose. The grief does not go away, but it becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." His words offered a strange comfort, the idea that what she was feeling might eventually become bearable. They fell back into silence, but it was a more companionable quiet now, the kind shared between two people who understood loss. The Barrett Ranch appeared on the horizon about an hour later, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley between two low hills. The main house was a sturdy adobe structure with a wide porch, and Winnie could see corrals and outbuildings scattered around it. Cattle dotted the landscape, their red and white forms standing out against the brown grass. Owen pulled the wagon up to the house and helped her down. "Come inside and I will show you what needs doing." The interior of the house was neat but sparse, with the bare functionality of a place inhabited by someone who did not think much about comfort or aesthetics. The curtains were faded and torn in places, and the furniture was mismatched. But it had good bones, with thick adobe walls that kept out the heat and large windows that let in plenty of light. "I know it is not much to look at," Owen said, sounding almost embarrassed. "My mother had it fixed up nice, but after she passed, I just let things go." "It has potential," Winnie said, running her hand along a dusty windowsill. "With some new curtains and maybe some cushions for the chairs, it could be quite comfortable." She spent the next hour taking measurements and making notes, while Owen showed her the pile of mending that needed attention. There were shirts with torn elbows, trousers with split seams, and one jacket that looked like it had been dragged through a bramble patch. As she examined each item, Winnie found herself slipping into the familiar rhythm of work, her mind focusing on the practical tasks at hand instead of the grief that threatened to overwhelm her. "I will need to take these back to town to work on them properly," she said. "But I can have the first batch done by next week if you want to collect them then." "That would be fine," Owen said. "And if you need any fabric for the curtains, I can take you to the general store and you can pick out whatever you like." They loaded the mending into the wagon, and Owen drove her back toward Hillsborough. Along the way, they passed a small creek lined with cottonwood trees, their leaves already beginning to turn gold with the approach of autumn. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop. "I usually let the horses drink here," he explained. "It will just take a moment." Winnie climbed down and walked to the edge of the creek while Owen tended to the team. The water burbled over smooth rocks, and she could see small fish darting in the shallows. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply stand and breathe, to feel the sun on her face and the breeze in her hair. "It is peaceful here," she said when Owen joined her. "It is one of my favorite spots," he admitted. "Sometimes when things get overwhelming, I come here just to think." She glanced at him, taking in his profile as he gazed at the water. He had a strong jaw and a straight nose, and there was something solid and dependable about him that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since Elizabeth died. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for giving me this work. I know you probably do not really need all that mending done, and you were just trying to help." Owen turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious. "I meant what I said about it being a business arrangement, but I will admit, when Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might be struggling, I wanted to do something. Not out of pity," he added quickly, seeing her expression, but because I know what it is like to feel alone, and I thought maybe I could make things a little easier." Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection that went beyond mere employer and worker. Winnie felt it like a spark, a tiny flame of warmth in the cold emptiness that had consumed her since Elizabeth's death. "Well, I appreciate it all the same," she said quietly. They returned to the wagon and continued on to Hillsborough. When they reached the boarding house, Owen helped her carry the mending up to her room. He paused in the doorway, looking at the hats scattered across the work table. "Those are beautiful," he said. "You are very talented." "Elizabeth made most of them," Winnie said. "She had the eye for design. I just helped with the finishing touches." "I am sure you are being modest," Owen said gently. "I will see you next week, Miss Zimmerman." After he left, Winnie sat down at her sewing machine and began working on the first shirt. The familiar motion of the needle moving through fabric was soothing, and she lost herself in the work. For the first time since Elizabeth's death, the hours passed without the crushing weight of grief pressing down on her every moment. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Owen would come to town every Saturday to collect the finished mending and bring her new items to work on. Sometimes he would take her out to the ranch to work on the curtains, and she found herself looking forward to those trips, to the conversation they would share during the ride, and the peaceful hours spent sewing in his mother's old sewing room. The curtains were coming along beautifully. She had chosen a cheerful yellow fabric with small white flowers, and as she hung them in the ranch house windows, the whole place seemed to brighten. Owen had been so pleased that he had asked her to make cushions for the chairs and a new tablecloth for the dining room. One Saturday in late October, Owen arrived at the boarding house with an unusual request. "I am having some of the neighboring ranchers over for dinner next week," he said. "Sort of a harvest celebration. I was wondering if you might be willing to help me prepare for it. I can cook basic meals, but I am afraid my skills do not extend to entertaining." Winnie hesitated. It seemed like a step beyond their business arrangement, more personal somehow, but the hopeful look in his eyes made it impossible to refuse. "I suppose I could help," she said. "What did you have in mind?" His face lit up with relief. "Maybe you could help me plan a menu and make sure the house looks presentable. I would pay you for your time, of course." So the following Wednesday, Winnie found herself at the Barrett Ranch, helping Owen clean and organize the house. They worked side by side, washing windows and sweeping floors, and she found herself laughing at his jokes and sharing stories from her childhood in Ohio. It felt good to laugh, to feel something other than the constant ache of loss. As evening approached, Owen insisted she stay for supper. He had made a simple stew, and they ate at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. Winnie told him about the hats she and Elizabeth used to dream up, elaborate confections of feathers and lace that no practical frontier woman would ever wear. Owen told her about his plans for the ranch, his hopes of building up his herd and maybe even breeding horses someday. "You have big dreams," Winnie observed. "Is that a bad thing?" he asked. "No, I think it is wonderful. Elizabeth and I had big dreams too before." She trailed off, the familiar grief rising up. Owen reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused from years of hard work, and the simple touch sent a jolt through her. "You still have dreams, Winnie," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. "They might be different now, but that does not mean you cannot have them." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I do not know what my dreams are anymore. Everything I wanted was tied up with Elizabeth. Without her, I feel lost." "Then maybe it is time to find new dreams," Owen said. "And maybe you do not have to find them alone." She met his gaze, saw the depth of feeling there, and felt her heart skip. Over the past weeks, She had been so focused on her grief that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge the growing attraction she felt toward this kind, gentle man. But now, sitting in his kitchen with his hand holding hers, she could not deny it any longer. "Owen," she whispered, not sure what she was going to say. He stood and came around the table, pulling her gently to her feet. They stood facing each other, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I know it has not been very long since you lost your sister," he said. "And I do not want to rush you or make you feel pressured. But I need you to know that these past weeks, getting to know you, having you in my life, it has meant everything to me. You have brought light back into this house, back into my life. And I think, if you are willing, that maybe we could help each other find our way forward." Winnie felt something break open inside her, all the emotions she had been holding back flooding through. She thought of Elizabeth, of how her sister had always told her she needed to open her heart, to let people in. And standing here with Owen, she knew that Elizabeth would have wanted this for her, would have wanted her to find happiness even in the midst of grief. "I am willing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am scared, but I am willing." Owen smiled and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears on her cheeks. "We can be scared together," he said, and then he kissed her. It was a soft, sweet kiss, full of tenderness and promise. Winnie felt herself melting into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathless. "Stay," Owen said. "Not here, not tonight, but in New Mexico. Do not leave Hillsborough. Give us a chance to see where this might go." "I was not planning on leaving," Winnie said. "I have nowhere else to go." "That is not what I meant," Owen said. "I do not want you to stay because you have no other options. I want you to stay because you want to be here, because you want to see what we could build together." Winnie looked around the kitchen, at the cheerful curtains she had made, at the home she had helped bring back to life. Then she looked at Owen, at this good man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. "You still have someone if you want," Owen said softly. "You are not as alone as you think." The words hit her like a benediction, a promise that she could have a future even without Elizabeth. It would be different, it would hurt, but she would not have to face it by herself. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want this. I want you." They kissed again, deeper this time, and Winnie felt something inside her begin to heal. It would be a long process, she knew. Grief did not disappear overnight. But with Owen by her side, she thought she might be able to bear it. As the stars came out over the New Mexico desert, Owen drove Winnie back to Hillsborough. They held hands in the wagon, not speaking much, just enjoying the closeness. When they reached the boarding house, Owen helped her down and walked her to the door. "I will see you on Saturday," he said. "I will be counting the days," Winnie replied, and she meant it. The dinner party the following week was a success. Winnie helped Owen prepare a feast of roasted beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie. The neighboring ranchers and their wives were friendly and welcoming, and several of the women asked Winnie about her hat-making skills. By the end of the evening, she had orders for 3 new hats and a promise of steady work making curtains for another ranch house. As the guests departed, and Winnie helped Owen clean up, she felt a sense of belonging she had not experienced since, before Elizabeth died. This was becoming her life, her community, her home. "You were wonderful tonight," Owen said as they washed the last of the dishes. "Everyone loved you." "I enjoyed myself," Winnie admitted. "It felt good to be part of something again." Owen dried his hands and turned to her. "I have been thinking about something," he said, "and I know it might be too soon, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore." Winnie felt her heart begin to race. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you, Winnie Zimmerman," he said. "Maybe I already have fallen in love with you. And I know we have not been courting very long, and I know you are still grieving your sister, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. So I am asking, would you consider making this permanent? Would you consider becoming my wife?" Winnie felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of joy, of hope, of a future she had thought she would never have. "Owen," she breathed, "I do not know what to say." "Say yes," he urged, taking her hands. "Say you will marry me and make this house a home. Say you will let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." She thought of Elizabeth, of the dreams they had shared, of the life they had planned to build together. And she knew with absolute certainty that her sister would have wanted this for her. Elizabeth would have loved Owen, would have approved of this match, would have pushed Winnie toward happiness with both hands. "Yes," Winnie said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Owen let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. When he set her down, they were both laughing, and he kissed her with all the passion and tenderness she could have hoped for. They were married in December, in a small ceremony at the Hillsborough church. Mrs. Patterson stood as Winnie's witness, and one of Owen's ranch hands stood as his. Winnie wore a new dress she had made herself, a deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and she carried a small bouquet of dried wildflowers. As she walked down the aisle toward Owen, she felt Elizabeth's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder, a blessing and an encouragement. The wedding was followed by a small celebration at the ranch, with neighbors and friends gathering to toast the happy couple. As Winnie danced with her new husband in the parlor they had fixed up together, she felt truly happy for the first time since losing her sister. That night, alone in their bedroom, Owen held her close and whispered promises of love and devotion. Winnie gave herself to him completely, and in the joining of their bodies, she felt a new chapter of her life beginning. The first year of marriage was not without its challenges. Winnie still had moments of crushing grief, days when she missed Elizabeth so much she could barely function. But Owen was always there, patient and understanding, holding her when she cried and giving her space when she needed it. And gradually, the good days began to outnumber the bad ones. Winnie's hat and sewing business grew steadily. She converted one of the ranch's spare rooms into a proper workroom, and women from Hillsborough and the surrounding ranches came to her for custom hats and dresses. She found joy in the work, in creating beautiful things with her hands, and she often felt Elizabeth's influence in her designs. Owen's ranch prospered as well. His cattle herd grew, and he began breeding horses as he had dreamed. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, building a life together in the harsh but beautiful New Mexico landscape. In the spring of 1884, Winnie discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified and excited in equal measure, and when she told Owen the news, he was overjoyed. He became impossibly protective, insisting she rest more and take on less work, though Winnie insisted she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. As her belly grew round with their child, Winnie often found herself talking to Elizabeth, telling her sister about the baby, about Owen, about the life she had built. She liked to think Elizabeth was listening, that somehow her twin could share in this happiness. On a warm October evening in 1884, Winnie went into labor. Owen rode frantically to fetch the midwife, and for the next 12 hours, Winnie labored to bring their child into the world. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, and there were moments when she thought she could not go on. But Owen was there, holding her hand and encouraging her, and finally, just as the sun was rising over the desert, their son was born. They named him Oscar William Barrett, and when Winnie held him for the first time, she felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it took her breath away. He had Owen's dark hair and her green eyes, and he was perfect in every way. Elizabeth would have loved him, Winnie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She does love him," Owen said softly, wrapping his arms around both of them. "I have no doubt about that." Oscar was a healthy, happy baby, and Winnie threw herself into motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else. She was surprised by how naturally it came to her, how much joy she found in the simple acts of nursing and rocking and singing lullabies. Owen was a devoted father, often walking the floor with Oscar when he was fussy and making silly faces to coax out his son's first smiles. As Oscar grew into a chubby, curious toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Owen hired more ranch hands to help manage the expanding operation, and Winnie's sewing business became known throughout the territory. They were building something real and lasting, a legacy they could pass on to their son and any future children. In the summer of 1886, Winnie became pregnant again. This time she was less anxious, more confident in her ability to bring a child safely into the world. Their daughter, Margaret Rose, was born in March of 1887, a tiny, delicate thing with auburn hair like her mother's. Oscar, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch house that had once seemed so empty and sad was now filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Winnie's workroom was often invaded by Oscar and Margaret, who loved to play with scraps of fabric and watch their mother create beautiful things. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, Owen and Winnie would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the desert. These were Winnie's favorite moments, when she could reflect on how far she had come, how much her life had changed since that terrible day when Elizabeth died. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked one evening. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up the dreams you and Elizabeth had?" Winnie took his hand and squeezed it. "Never," she said firmly. "I miss Elizabeth every day, and I always will. But you gave me something I did not think I could have after she died. You gave me a future, a family, a reason to keep going. How could I regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Owen said. "I am," Winnie assured him. "I am happier than I ever thought possible." The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Oscar started school in Hillsborough, riding into town each day on his pony. Margaret grew into a spirited little girl who followed her brother everywhere, and had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. In 1890, Winnie gave birth to another son, Edward James, and their family felt complete. The ranch expanded to become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Owen's reputation as a fair and honest businessman grew, and he became a respected member of the community. Winnie's hat shop became legendary, with women traveling from as far away as Santa Fe to commission her work. But despite all their success and prosperity, the most important thing remained the love they shared. Owen never stopped courting Winnie, bringing her wildflowers from the desert and stealing kisses in the barn when the children were not looking. Winnie made sure Owen knew how much he was appreciated, cooking his favorite meals and leaving him little love notes tucked into his work shirts. As New Mexico moved toward statehood in the 1890s, the Barrett family moved with it, adapting to the changes while holding fast to the values that had built their life together. They watched their children grow, saw Oscar develop a passion for ranching like his father, saw Margaret show an interest in design and sewing like her mother, saw Edward develop a love for horses that promised to carry on Owen's breeding program. On a cool evening in October of 1895, 13 years after that first meeting in the boarding house parlor, Winnie stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land they had built together. Oscar was 15 now, tall and strong and already taking on more responsibility around the ranch. Margaret was 8, full of sass and sweetness in equal measure. Edward was 5, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. Owen came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about, Elizabeth?" Winnie admitted. "I was remembering how lost I felt when she died, how I thought my life was over. And now look at all this. Look at what we have built." "She would be proud of you," Owen said. "I think she would be proud of us both," Winnie corrected. "You saved me, Owen. When I had nothing and no one, you gave me everything." "You saved me too," Owen said. "This house was just a building before you came into my life. You made it a home. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be better than I was." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, they could hear the children playing, their laughter ringing through the house like music. "You still have someone if you want," Owen had said to her all those years ago, and those words had changed everything. He had offered her a lifeline when she was drowning in grief, and she had been brave enough to take it. Now, surrounded by the life they had built together, Winnie knew that she had not just survived Elizabeth's death. She had found a way to thrive, to love again, to create something beautiful out of the ashes of her loss. Elizabeth would always be a part of her, always be missed, but Winnie had learned that it was possible to carry grief and joy at the same time, to honor the past while embracing the future. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Owen took Winnie's hand and led her inside, where their children were waiting. They gathered around the dinner table, this family they had created together, and bowed their heads as Owen said grace. Winnie added her own silent prayer of thanksgiving, grateful for the man beside her, for the children around the table, for the life she had never expected to have. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenges and blessings. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, illnesses that frightened them, and the normal trials of raising 3 strong-willed children. But through it all, Owen and Winnie faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. In 1898, Oscar announced his intention to attend the agricultural college that had opened in Las Cruces. Winnie cried when he left, but they were tears of pride as much as sadness. Her son was becoming a man, ready to take on the world, and she knew he would make them proud. Margaret, now 11, had taken over much of Winnie's hat-making business, showing a natural talent that exceeded even her mother's considerable skills. She had a modern sensibility that appealed to the younger women in town, and together, mother and daughter created designs that were both practical and beautiful. Edward, at 8, was already showing signs of being a gifted horseman. He spent every spare moment in the corrals, working with the horses, learning everything he could from his father. Owen saw himself in his youngest son and took great joy in passing on his knowledge and love of the animals. On their 15th wedding anniversary in December of 1897, Owen surprised Winnie with a trip to Santa Fe. They left the children in the capable hands of Owen's foreman and his wife, and spent 3 glorious days exploring the territorial capital, shopping in the plaza, and staying in a fine hotel. It was the first time they had been alone together since Oscar was born, and they reveled in the freedom and romance of it. On their last night in Santa Fe, as they lay together in the hotel bed, Owen pulled Winnie close and kissed her forehead. "Have I told you lately that you are the best thing that ever happened to me?" Winnie smiled and traced her fingers along his jaw. "You tell me every day in 1,000 different ways." "I want to make sure you know it," Owen said. "I want you to understand that every single day, I wake up grateful that you chose me, that you took a chance on a lonely rancher who did not know what he was missing until you walked into his life." "I am the one who should be grateful," Winnie said. "You gave me a reason to keep living when I thought I had lost everything. You showed me that it was possible to love again, to build a new life, to find happiness even in the midst of grief." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of long familiarity, and afterward, Winnie lay in Owen's arms feeling completely content. This was her life, this man was her heart, and she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought them together. As the new century approached, bringing with it all the promise and uncertainty of a new era, the Barrett family looked toward the future with confidence. Oscar returned from college with new ideas about ranching techniques and water conservation that he was eager to implement. Margaret's hat designs were being featured in catalogs that reached across the Southwest. Edward was breeding horses that were gaining a reputation for their intelligence and stamina. And through it all, Owen and Winnie remained the steady center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, had faced loss and celebrated triumphs, had built something that would last long beyond their own lives. In 1902, on a warm spring day, Winnie stood in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch and placed flowers on a marker she had erected years earlier. It bore Elizabeth's name and the dates of her too short life, along with the words "beloved sister," forever remembered. "I did it, Lizzie," Winnie whispered to the stone. "I found a way to keep going. I found love and built a family and created a life that I think you would be proud of. I still miss you every single day, but I am not alone anymore. I have Owen and the children, and I have the memories of you that I carry in my heart. Thank you for giving me the courage to dream big dreams, even if they turned out different than we planned." A warm breeze rustled through the grass, and Winnie smiled, feeling her sister's presence as surely as if Elizabeth stood beside her. She stayed a while longer, talking to her twin about the children, about the ranch, about all the small joys and sorrows that made up a life well lived. When she finally walked back down the hill, Owen was waiting for her at the bottom, just as he always was. He held out his hand and she took it, their fingers interlacing in the familiar, comfortable way of long practice. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am perfect," Winnie said, and she meant it. "Let us go home." They walked together back to the ranch house, where their children were waiting, where their life together continued to unfold in all its messy, beautiful glory. The house that had once been empty and sad was now filled with love and laughter, a testament to the healing power of time and the transformative nature of love. Years later, when Winnie was an old woman with silver in her auburn hair and grandchildren playing at her feet, she would look back on that terrible day when Elizabeth died and see it as a turning point rather than an ending. It had been the worst day of her life, yes, but it had also been the beginning of something wonderful. Without that loss, she would never have met Owen, would never have built this family, would never have discovered the depths of her own strength and resilience. She would remember the cowboy who had appeared in her darkest hour and offered her not pity, but partnership. Who had said, "You still have someone if you want," and meant himself, meant the future they could build together, meant the love that would carry them through decades of life in the wild, beautiful landscape of New Mexico. And sitting on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, Winnie would squeeze Owen's weathered hand and thank God for every moment they had been given together. The grief of losing Elizabeth never entirely went away, but it had been joined by so much joy, so much love, so much life that the pain became bearable, became part of the rich tapestry of her existence rather than the defining feature. Their love story had begun in grief and blossomed into something extraordinary. And as the sun set over the desert one more time, painting the sky in glorious shades of gold and crimson, Winnie and Owen sat together and watched, grateful for every sunset they had shared and hopeful for all the ones yet to come. Their children and grandchildren moved around them, the ranch continuing to thrive, the legacy they had built together extending far into the future. This was the life Elizabeth would have wanted for her sister. This was the happiness Winnie had never expected to find. And this was the love that had saved her, sustained her, and given her a reason to keep believing in tomorrow. In the end, she had not just survived her twin sister's death. She had found a way to truly live, to love deeply, and to build something lasting and beautiful in the harsh but magnificent landscape of the American West.